And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers.
A quarter pounder with cheese in Paris.
What do they call it?
Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
Hello everyone, welcome to another video talking geeky stuff with me, Tenchi. And today's video is going to be about 90s cinema. If anybody's followed my videos will know that I've done a 90s action movies a few weeks ago, and 80s and so on. So following the 90s action movies, I'm going to focus generally on just cinema in general. And I tell you, in the 90s, they had some amazing movies. It was so hard to pick, to do a list of movies. It is the hardest. I mean, I think there was, in my opinion, I liked more movies in the 90s than I did in the 80s. Of course, watching movies in the 80s, a little bit different because, you know, you're a kid, you're young, and you have fond memories like the Back to the Futures, Goonies, and so on. But in the 90s, you had, because, you know, you become an adult, and a lot of films become more thought-provocating. Hope I pronounced that right. Well, it makes you think more, in other words. And you understand the story a lot more. You know, you can start watching more violent films. I mean, when you're a kid, you watch, like, say, Predator, Commando, Rambo, you thought they were cool. But as you get older, you watch kind of action, violent films. It's still cool, of course, in certain ways, but you kind of watch it and you kind of look at it and say, well, ooh, was that justified? So you start thinking more like an adult, of course. Then, of course, that time I was studying graphic design and I was into a bit editing as well. So I was actually thinking of becoming a director or something like that. So I started looking at camera angles, composition, lighting, certain angles, you know, even thinking about being a screenwriter, you know, listening to directors when I do the making of how they position cameras here and do this, then even looking at writers, how they would write dialogue and so on. Funny thing, I was never wanted to be an actor, but I was, you know, back in my mind, I would love to be a director, a screenwriter, and so on. So I kind of noticed more of that. And of course, especially becoming studying design, where you look at certain things and you see things a lot different than you were, say, 10 years ago in the 80s, right? But the 90s, I mean, it was a good year because it kind of taken the 60s, 70s, 80s kind of experience all combined into one. I mean, I know that's the same, it's the process, but, you know, you had the special effects really it jumped. It really kind of leapt, especially after Jurassic Park. And you're probably wondering why ain't Jurassic Park on this list? Because that's for another video. Or maybe even after Terminator 2, that's when the special effects jumped up. People start to realize what they can achieve with the right time, the budget and so on. And speaking about budget, I think there was a lot more higher budget movies in the 90s. Cinema was growing, making more money, so studios were giving directors more budget to make films. So action set pieces got bigger and better, special effects got better, and so on. It's also the year where they got rid of the big guy. If you look at the 90s, you had Arnie, Stallone, Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, those kind of big muscular guys, right? The 90s kind of brought forth the average guy could be an action hero as well. Make it more believable. And I think the word believable was also in the 90s, where a lot of their films started to get grounded. I mean, take a look at Pulp Fiction, where Tarantino's talent comes in, kind of set the world on light a little bit with Pulp Fiction. How he grounded the dialogue, made it witty, and people can relate to it because in some ways it's pretty realistic. I mean, take a look at Leon, badass, killer, but you look at him, you won't think so. So I think the 90s was about that. And you look at the list I put up here. Take Shawshank Redemption. The funny thing about that, I watched that.
What I meant was, you tell me, who is your daddy and what does he do?
A little clip there for Kindergarten Cop, 1990. I think it was one of his films that he tried to do comedy, which ain't so bad. That become a worldwide meme. And of course, you've got honourable mentions as well. Out of Sight, another great film. Great dialogue between George Clooney, and that scene when George Clooney at the back of a trunk with Jennifer Lopez, kind of taken as hostage. The whole scene was amazing. It's pretty dark. You can see a lot of the silhouettes, and just the talking between those two, the dialogue was really good, and it's kind of realistic. That's what two people would talk about. It's actually really good, so definitely check that out. Seven. Another amazing film, as I mentioned. Morgan Freeman's the greatest supporting cast of all time. And I tell you what film actually is really good and got better through time is Michael Douglas, Falling Down. That came out, 91, if I remember correctly, and I watched it then on VHS. No, I watched it in 92 or so. And I liked it then, but I was just a teenager, like 16 years old or something like that, and I liked it. But of course I remember watching it again when it came on DVD in the later 90s, and I appreciate it a lot more because I was in my young adult and I was kind of final years in university, part-time job, loads of things were going crazy, you have a lot more responsibilities, your parents not there to look after you, whatever. And then of course I watched that another few years after. I watched it again, and again I watched it recently a couple of years ago. It actually gets better because as you get older you realize what he goes through. Work can be stressful, friends can be stressful, society is stressful, partners, your boyfriend, girlfriend is stressful, and then just everything around you is stressful, you know what I mean? And you can understand why some people just flip and go crazy. And I'm not saying that, I mean, everyone should, of course. I mean, sometimes you do feel you just want to do something, and like, why is this world so messed up? And I watched that, I'm thinking, wow, I can actually understand him a lot more clearly now because I'm getting to that age. I tell you what's another great film as well, which is The Frighteners by Peter Jackson. It's the movie he did just before Lord of the Rings. That is a nice, small, starring Michael J. Fox, funny, about ghosts, and he can see ghosts, really funny, great special effects for that time. That film I like because It reminds me of a Steven Spielberg present movie. You can take that and put that in the 80s and fit in with his movies. Then of course you've got Titanic here. I mean, I liked it. Not amazing, but I liked it. I just felt I put it in there because what it done for the 90s, the biggest grossing film of all time for 12 years until Avatar overtook it. And yeah, that's why I kept it there. I know the 90s had many more films, but some of them I liked at that time, but watching some of them again, like for example, Usual Suspects. I thought that's great when I first watched it. Then I waited a few more years, watched it again. I thought, okay, once the saying goes, once the cat is out of the bag, you lose that suspense. So it wasn't as good as the first time, if you know what I mean. So that's one of the reasons why. And then also there's a lot of Tom Cruise films I left out as well, because I'm going to do another separate video about him. But anyway, please let me know. Do you prefer the 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010s onwards movies? Or is 90s your favourite? If so, do you agree with my list here? But anyway, please consider subscribing if you want to hear me talk more geeky stuff. I should say thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and please stay safe.
I'll be back. Ha! You did not gonna say that, did you?
That's what you always say.
I do?